February 6th meeting of the Murfreesboro City Council. Councilman Kurt Wade has our prayer and our pledge.
All right, let us pray. Lord, we just thank you for this day. Thank you for our city of Murfreesboro. We just thank you for the leadership of our city. We ask you to bless everybody in our city. We ask you to bless our country. In Jesus Christ's name, amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we'll move into the consent agenda.
Mayor McFarland, just a quick note. Number one is if you choose to include it in the consent agenda, it would be approved subject to final legal review.
Okay. If someone makes a motion, if you'd make that contingent to staff comments, that would be great.
Move for approval, subject to staff comments. Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll move into old business. We have ordinance 19 OZ 43 to rezone approximately 122.19 acres located along Cason Trail, Eastview Drive, and Racket Club Drive. This is second and final reading.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
No.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
No.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right, we'll move into new business. We have water recovery facility aerators installation, water resources. Mr. Gore.
Mayor McFarland, City Council, thank you for the opportunity to come before you tonight. I'm going to mess up Mr. Blomley's PowerPoint so I can bring mine up. Sorry, Matthew. So depending on how much time you all want to burn here talking about water resource recovery facility improvements and water plant improvements and different things, I've got some pictures here that try to make this a little more interesting. So what you see on the screen, we have, I believe, 9 aerators at the Water Resource Recovery Facility. These things are actually large impellers that entrain air into our microbiological treatment oxidation ditches. We budgeted for 3 of those. We've actually purchased the materials, and using our water, wastewater, mechanical, electrical services contract with John Bouchard and Sons, we are now asking for them to help us install those 3 aerators at the WRF. Their cost to install those are basically $23,349 each. So the total install would be about $70,047. So we do have standing hourly unit prices and equipment unit prices that we establish these work orders with them. So I'm available for any questions on that item if you have them.
Any questions for Mr. Gore?
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll now move into Murfreesboro Water Resources water tank painting and repairs.
Yes, sir. These there's a couple of pictures here of the Mill Street tank and of the Halls Hill tank. I don't have the Tiger Hill tank pictured here, but we effectively have 3. The Tiger Hill tank and the Halls Hill tank are ground storage reservoirs. That's that upper right picture. It's really just a large concrete reservoir that is on a hill, so it doesn't need to be elevated. The Mill Street tank you all see across the street from City Hall is has the logo Murfreesboro, home of MTSU. One of those pictures there in the top center, that was from 2005. I had forgotten this, but it had a blue, kind of a blue apron on the tower section, and blue is actually on top. We repainted that tank back in '05, and it is now entirely white. That tank does have some traces of lead in it, so it's going to have to be sandblasted down to bare metal. That's part of the reason that this overall project is about 2.6 million. It has been budgeted. We do have it in our working capital reserve, so it will be paid for through cash on hand. The interesting dialogue we've had with MTSU, just like with our repurified tank, the Murfreesboro is True Blue tank, they are wanting us to look at putting a different logo on the Mill Street tank. So there would kind of be, if you see on the view shed as you come over Medical Center Parkway and you look down Bloomfield Links, you can see the Murfreesboro True Blue tank, and you actually in the distance you can see the Mill Street tank. So there's been some ideas thrown around there to paint that tank blue and maybe invert the Murfreesboro True Blue to a white. So a white lettering on a blue background kind of scheme. Mr. Smotherman asked that I would bring back to the council artist renderings of maybe the different designs that MTSU would like us to put on there. But that money has been budgeted into the cost of the project. We would look to MTSU to reimburse for those logos, for the cost of putting that logo on the tank. For Halls Hill and Tiger Hill, they're just going to get painted white, and there's some repair work on the concrete that needs to happen. So we had a low bid of $2,557,130 to Curran's Construction Services LLC. So we would recommend awarding the bid to Curran's in that amount. And I'm available for questions on this as well.
Mr. Gore,
Yes.
with the, I know I've attended some of these meetings where you've talked about this in depth, but how often will the tank need to be repainted? And I know that's different than what you're doing from a sandblasting standpoint. What's the difference in those two things? And
Right. So I think the Mill Street tank lasted, the last recoating that we had was around just over 10 years. And I think some of these tanks can last up to 15. So I would say 10 to 15 before you recoat. The Mill Street tank having to go down to bare metal, I think we've recoated that tank up to 5 times. So that's why once you get to a certain number of coating, because there is a mill thickness requirement, we have people going out there making sure that the paint's applied at the proper thickness. When it gets to a certain point, though, you just have to sandblast it down to bare metal. So I don't think that the Mill Street tank has been sandblasted down to bare metal, maybe since it was constructed, 45, 50 years. So again, and with the lead, there is some lead in some of those earlier coats of paint. They're not exposed to the water, but they're in there deeper into the earlier coatings of the tank. So we've got to do some abatement there when we sandblast it.
and just the regular cost of the repaint of the tank, not to sandblast?
That's a good, I don't know if I have that available. I'm sorry, yeah, you got me there. I can get those numbers to you.
Just a question, so.
Yeah. I'd have to go back and look at some old bids.
Is it, I see the concrete water tanks, out 99, and there's a couple of those around, I guess.
Right.
At any point, does it make sense to build a new one?
Well, we have the appropriate number. There's a best practice.
Instead of metal and paint?
Well, if we had more hills around town that were at the proper elevation, the unique thing about Murfreesboro's water system, since we have a little extra time, I can give you a little hydraulics class.
Never
We
mind.
have all the tanks are at the same overflow elevation. So if you go out to Tiger Hill and you go out to Halls Hill, when they're full at their utmost elevation, that is equal to the Jones Boulevard, the Stony Meadow, and the Mill Street tank. So they all empty at the same rate. So we are in one pressure zone in the city of Murfreesboro.
I think what he's, not speaking for you, I think, how much is it to build a new tank?
Yeah, to
Oh,
use a metal one and rebuild
well,
it.
so $2.5 million for elevated tank. I think that's what our repurified tank costs.
Okay.
Again, in order to do a ground storage reservoir, a concrete tank, you just have to find the proper hill in Murfreesboro for that. It's cheaper to do ground storage, so whenever you can build a ground storage tank, that is the better option. You just have to have the appropriate elevation on a hill.
I guess my next question would be, we're about to spend $2 million to sandblast it and paint it. Is that the number I saw?
Oh, no, it's 2.55 million, and that's to get Mill Street tank totally refurbished and to paint and repair Halls Hill and Tiger Hill. So there's 3 tanks involved.
Okay.
I would say, if you don't mind, before we strike any deal with MTSU, let's discuss as a council. We do have the one MTSU tank already. I'm not sure that we don't want to look at maybe a city, some city branding, the city of Murfreesboro on there, since we already have a True Blue tank. I'm not saying not to do that for MTSU, but it'd be interesting to see how much the cost of that lettering would be, and then if we want to do something as a city, that we have the opportunity to do that.
Absolutely, that's why I'm bringing it up.
Okay.
If we'll.
And we should have that pretty readily available because we just did the True Blue one not that long ago. And so we've got the information as to what it costs to do that one.
Oh, yeah, it's actually fairly inexpensive to get a good, it was, I think, around $45,000 or $50,000 to get that logo on there.
I was thinking the same line as Shane. I was looking at the logo right behind Shane as putting on the tank for the city of Murfreesboro.
Glad we're having the discussion.
We're also looking at doing some branding work, and so that in addition to, because there's quite a bit of area up there, in addition to maybe the logo, we could incorporate some branding or something like that in there.
Put Shane's name up there.
And it's not, again, we can get it painted, and if we want to wait, if it gets more involved, we can always come back and do it. And it's, again, not extremely expensive to add that later.
Yeah.
Because they are going to, sorry?
And $50,000 is nothing to laugh at either.
Right.
That's what it costs to do it. So, I mean,
Correct.
if MTSU is willing to pay that $50,000 versus us paying $50,000 for our name on there, I mean, we can tell the one that says True Blue says Murfreesboro on it. So it may just come down to each person's preference as to whether we're using it as a marketing tool for MTSU or whether or not we're using it for a marketing tool for Murfreesboro. And I know during our workshop, we had a lot of conversation about working on our branding. So I guess the question is, do we want to spend $50,000 for our brand versus their brand that has our name on it? So.
All right, we have a recommendation from Water Resources.
If there are no further questions, I'll move for approval.
Second. I second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. We'll move into sanitary sewer rehab change order 1.
Just as a reminder, this is kind of a plan sheet. You can see with the legend, we have a lot of different repair, replacement, and rehabilitation techniques for our sanitary sewer, which is what we do spring, summer, and fall to try to prepare for rain events like today. Although when you get a rain event like today, sometimes all your good work and effort just gets somewhat inundated by extreme rain event. So this is the reminder. We awarded this project in July of 2019. It was a $3.8 million project with just over 17,000 of cured in place pipe, 1,335 vertical feet of manhole lining, and 170 sewer lateral linings. The change order we're asking for today is an additional $150,000, bringing the total construction expenditures up to about $3.99 million, just under $4 million. We had $4.5 million budgeted. When you take away engineering expense, we still have about $75,000 remaining per our budget. The additional work does involve some sewer main replacement that we had done at West Clark and Northwest Broad, and some exploratory digging and some paving repairs is involved with some sewer lateral work that we had unexpected. So we would ask for council approval for the change order in an amount of $150,812. And I'm available for questions on this as well.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Farland.
Has a question.
Aye. Yes, ma'am.
Speaking of water,
Yes, ma'am.
how are we doing with the flooding last night and the situation? Are we looking good in Murfreesboro?
There was a lot of email correspondence going back and forth, and I know we had some high water signage and some road closures, and I know Raymond Hillis in the Streets Department was primarily involved with ensuring kind of the public welfare in those streets. So as far as I know, I put a little memo out on the sewer side of things that said we did have some challenges. We were at 64 million gallons a day at our plant, which is rated for 24, so we were really pumping some water through there. But the great news is that everybody still has safe drinking water. No one, as far as I know, was hurt. The public welfare was safeguarded, and everyone was able to take a shower and use their facilities this morning. So I'm going to say that we weathered the storm very successfully.
Will you pass along to your staff, the men and the women, that the council wants to thank them for a job well done?
Thank you very much. I know a lot of folks don't see it, but folks are getting up real early, and they're out on call in the middle of the night in very wet and dangerous conditions, and that's my prayer, is that everybody's just safe as the city workers are out there trying to make sure what roads are passable, and again, sometimes when you try to safeguard the public, I don't want them putting themselves at risk. So thank you.
All right. We now have engineering work authorization, Thompson Lane widening, Water Resources.
Yes, sir. This is just an exhibit up here that shows Thompson Lane at the intersection of Northwest Broad all the way over to Memorial Boulevard, about 4.2 miles. We got a letter from TDOT in December that said they wanted our utility relocation plans for this stretch of roadway by the end of April. It was a little bit of a shock to us. I know that they have not started acquiring right-of-way for the road widening of Thompson Lane, and that seems like a pretty short fuse to put us on to get utility relocation plans to them in 4 months. So that being said, we have the ability to do it. We have a master services agreement with Energy, Land, and Infrastructure. We kind of backed into the time it would take to do these relocation plans and get them to TDOT. So we have an hourly, not to exceed amount of $175,000, and we expect to meet the deadline of April 30th. My expectation is, though, that this road construction will not commence for quite some time. I'm not sure, Chris isn't here, but I don't know if this is necessarily on the hot track to get started the next couple of years. But we will comply with TDOT's request if you approve the contract.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance. Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet. Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye.
Mayor,
Yes.
talking about Thompson Lane, and I talked to Darren prior to the meeting about this. I spoke with Representative Sparks before the meeting tonight about Thompson Lane and funding for the project itself. And of course, TDOT has limited amount of funds, I know, but I still think that the sooner we can get Thompson Lane redone, the better off we'll all be, and at least widened. And so hopefully we can expedite that. And he said one way that we might expedite it would be if we were to send a letter signed by all the council members to the local delegation so that they would all be reminded of the importance of us getting Thompson Lane's bottleneck removed, and perhaps get it expedited with TDOT even. So if we can do that, that would be great. So just something to think about, and if you guys want to participate, we may be able to go ahead and get Thompson Lane moving quicker than what their current schedule says it is, because I know there's some of them that have good relationships with the governor, and perhaps there's potential of getting a little pressure on the governor to understand, with our growing community, the importance of making sure that our infrastructure continues to work properly and efficiently as we possibly can with the traffic concerns we have.
We can handle that, Craig, if we could work on a letter, and we'll get that to where we can get everyone signed. I think
We can do that.
it's not pertaining to Darren, but it would be good to get maybe Chris and Jim to give us an update on Bradyville Pike, Highway 96, really just all of our state roads. It would be good to get an update on where we are on several of those projects. I know we all get asked frequently on what's the timing on a lot of our state projects. So if we could maybe get an update, I think that'd help all of us.
I guess 99 is supposed to be completed by December, that one section that they're currently working on, so hopefully by Christmas, that'll be our present.
Yeah, we're going to get an update. As part of the monthly dashboard that we're going to prepare for council, should include the roadway projects in there and where they're at and the timing on there. But we can get Chris to do an update maybe next workshop on where we're at with those roads.
All right, let's move into engineering design task order for Stones River Water Plant improvements. Mr. Gore.
Mayor, thank you again.
Here's all the-
Council, we are asking for an engineering task order in the amount of $140,130 with Smith, Seckman, and Reed. What this task order is going to entail, we have some capital improvements or expenditures at our water plant where some variable frequency drives have reached the end of their useful life. We actually had one in have an emergency repair because the cooling piping in it burst unexpectedly, so we only have 2 operating right now. So this engineering task order would entail designing for new variable frequency drives which operate our high service pumps. We have 3 high service pumps now. We would also include in this task order the design for putting in a 4th pump. We have that, you can see on the right side of your screen. We have the blind flanges in place for the piping to install that 4th pump. So it would really just be the cost of the pump. The other variable, there are 4 variable frequency drives that operate our membrane pumps. The membrane pumps actually take the settled water out of the settling basin and pressurize those through our, for lack of a better term, our spaghetti strand membranes. If you've ever been out to the plant and seen those membranes, it takes a lot of pressure to get the water through there, but they're great filters, right? They take out all the Giardia lamblia and the Cryptosporidium and any of a lot of viruses as well, potential. So this total cost is around, for all those improvements, is about $2.56 million. So whenever I bring you a task order for engineering, I also like to bring up an estimate of what that ultimate total costs look like. So, but for now, we're just asking for the expenditure of the engineering task order with Smith, Seckman, and Reed in the amount of the $140,130. I'm available for questions.
Any questions for Mr. Gore?
No comments, I move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right, we are going to, thank you, Mr. Gore.
Thank you, Mayor.
We're going to move to light, before we have our public hearings, we're going to move to licensing.
Okay. We have one beer permit tonight before you, Mayor. This is for a change in ownership at a market at 1660 Middle Tennessee Boulevard. The application is in order for their background check. They do need to finish up their building codes inspections before we could issue that permit, and that would happen after we get that back, if you approve it tonight. I believe there is also an application coming for them to include wine in this market. It is currently there under the other owners, but that part is not ready yet. I'll be glad to try to answer any questions.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Sutherland.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. I don't see any board and commission appointments. I know we have 3 with the Golf Commission that are going to be coming up. Any statements to be paid?
No, Mayor.
Going a little backwards here, but is there any other business from staff? Okay. I'm going to call a recess for
30 minutes?
30 minutes, and then we'll start back with public hearings at 7 o'clock. All right, we'll stand in recess.
Is there anything?
All right, welcome back to the Murfreesboro City Council. We were on recess so we could have our public hearings at 7 o'clock. Mr. Blomley, I think you've got several different land use matters. We have a plan of services, annexation, and zoning of approximately 1.15 acres and 1.83 acres located along North Rutherford Boulevard and Yearwood Avenue.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor McFarland, and good evening, Mayor and members of council. Our first public hearing tonight is for the annexation of two parcels, or one full parcel and a portion of another parcel along Yearwood Avenue. The larger parcel actually has frontage on North Rutherford Boulevard that is already located in the city limits. And so the eastern portion of the parcel that fronts on Yearwood Avenue is in the unincorporated county. So the owner of that property is requesting that the balance of that larger parcel be annexed, as well as a smaller parcel to the south of that larger parcel. So it's the area colored in blue on the screen before you. The total acreage of the requested area is 1.15 acres. There's a companion zoning request that goes along with it. The plan of services for the proposed annexation is in your agenda packet. It shows that we'll be able to provide services to the requested area upon annexation. There are two existing single-family homes, and services can be provided to those existing single-family homes. There's a redevelopment plan that we'll go over in greater detail with the zoning application, but it does look like we can provide services upon annexation according to our plan of services. I will mention there is limited sewer capacity in the area, and a little bit of a preview for the zoning request that's next on the agenda is that they are proposing a multi-tenant commercial center on that property, and the applicants have been made aware by the Water Resources Department that only tenants that are low sewer users will be allowed to obtain will serve letters for that retail center. The applicant is aware of that and still wishes to proceed, thinking that he can fill up the proposed retail center with users that will be approved by the Water Resources Department. We'll go into more detail about the proposed development during the zoning public hearing. Now we need to conduct a public hearing regarding the annexation petition and the plan of services only. The zoning will be the subject of the public hearing that it will occur after that. Planning Commission conducted a public hearing on this matter on December the 4th and voted to recommend its approval to the City Council. I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing.
Any questions on the plan of services and the annexation? All right, seeing none, we'll need to hold a public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak, if you'll come to the podium, if you're representing a group, or excuse me, if you're coming to speak, you'll have 5 minutes. Anyone wishing to speak, if you'll ask your questions to the council, we'll get those answered at the end of the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak for this plan of services and annexation, please come to the podium.
Good evening. My name is Richard Graham. I live at 2403 Central Boulevard. I'm exactly northeast corner of Central and Yearwood Avenue. I can see all the way down the north boundary line of that property. I think, if I'm not mistaken, y'all approved a fence of some sort down Yearwood Avenue, solid fence. I would like for you to consider putting a fence on the north side and a fence on the south side. Now, it was, I think originally y'all decided to put trees, greenery, or whatever. I don't think that's a good enough containment for the neighborhood. I know progress has got to happen, and I'm sitting right on the boundary line of it. I sit on my front porch in the spring, summer, and fall, and I can see everything that happens right there on that corner. There's going to be a lot of foot traffic. They come from probably 1.5 miles away down here, Central Boulevard and Yearwood Avenue. And they cut through that property and go across to the Shell station across South Rutherford. And I just see a big problem if you don't put a containment fence up there on that property. At night, there's going to be a lot of headlight traffic that it's going to cut through the greenery. Also on, I would say on the south side too. Since I don't live down here, I'm kind of assuming that you're going to have traffic coming in, going around this building on the back side and back out on to South Rutherford. So I just think that what this neighborhood, or where I live and where others live, we're going to be stuck with this for the rest of our life. Now, I'm 78 years old. I mean, that may be 15 years. But there's other people that live there that it might be affecting them for the next 40 years, you know. So I'd like you to do consideration for that. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak?
Good evening, Mayor and the council. I'm Judy Smith Hughes. I live at 2416 Central Boulevard. And again, I am against any commercial business transpiring on the property that being talked about on Yearwood. It will not only impact the residents on Yearwood, but it will impact the residents on Central Boulevard, Anchor, McFarland, Juliet, all through there. Because when you have, even if you have a wall built up, regardless of how high it is, you're still going to have horns blowing, lights disturbing all of the neighborhood. And for it being a small residential neighborhood where people go out and walk their dogs, jog, take their children out, they're not going to be able to do that anymore. My recommendation to the developer is, instead of trying to bring in a business along Rutherford that impacts Yearwood, instead of demolishing the houses that are there, or go ahead and demolish them, but rebuild affordable housing to bring back single families into our neighborhood the way it should be. It's a small, narrow road, and too much traffic is going to impact all of our daily living. And the legacy that my father and mother left to me was the building up of this neighborhood. They started the neighborhood in 1938, and I would hate to see the legacy be destroyed by a business that does not need to be there. There's enough commercial business from Walmart all the way to MT Alumni Drive that we do not need any more there. Revitalize the neighborhood. Help us. Help us bring in more families with children and keep it the way it is and not have it destroyed. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you so much. Anyone wishing to speak for the plan of services or the annexation? All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. We'll consider on first reading Resolution 19R PS 51 for the plan of services. And again, this is that we can serve the property with services.
If there are no other questions, I'll move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Now, Resolution 19RA 51. This is for the annexation.
Move for approval.
Second.
Motion is second. Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. Now we're going to talk about the project. Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland. There's a zoning request simultaneous with that annexation for a PCD, Planned Commercial District, called Eastside Village PCD, simultaneous with annexation. As I mentioned, a portion of the property is already located in the city limits, so it's the area colored blue on the map before you is already in the city limits and is zoned RS15. The property in the pink purple color is what is proposed to be annexed and to zone PCD simultaneous with annexation. The developer proposes a strip retail center on the property. Mr. Taylor, Mr. Mulchan with SEC will go over the project in more detail in just a moment. I will mention a few things, though, from the Planning Commission meeting. There were several requests or several conditions of approval by the Planning Commission. One of them was to require a 6-foot-tall privacy fence along Yearwood Avenue, and that 6-foot-tall privacy fence along that eastern property line is reflected in the revised pattern book. Also, the recommended conditions of approval included a double row of evergreen plantings along both the north and south property lines. And also a little bit of background about this particular issue. In the original pattern book that went to the Planning Commission, there was a street connection to Yearwood Avenue. The Rutherford County Road Board, Mr. Taylor actually took that roadway connection to the Rutherford County Road Board, and the Rutherford County Road Board voted to deny that street connection to Yearwood Avenue. So consequently, when the Planning Commission took this up in December, we analyzed that issue, and the Planning Commission determined what the best course of action would be to show that as somewhat of a stub. As you'll notice in the southeast corner of the property, there is kind of a turnout there before you get to the fence and the buffer. And what that does is it reserves our ability to make that connection in the future should whoever is the jurisdiction controlling that right-of-way grant access, whether that's the city or the county. As I mentioned, right now, the county does not wish to approve that roadway connection. But until such time as that roadway connection is made, the fence and the buffer will still be along that stub. The revised pattern books are in your agenda package. As the speakers mentioned earlier, this is directly adjacent to an existing county single-family residential neighborhood along Yearwood Avenue. Along its western side is North Rutherford Boulevard, of course, a 4-lane major arterial street. And directly across North Rutherford Boulevard are existing commercial uses, including a Shell station and a multi-tenant retail center. There are several restaurants and a textbook broker store in that strip center. With that being said, I'd like to invite Mr. Mulchan up to give you a brief presentation on the proposed development and the proposed zoning request. I'll be happy to answer any questions regarding this before or after the public hearing.
Thank you, Matthew. Good evening, Rob Mulchan, SEC. I'm here tonight on behalf of Greenland Partners to present to you Eastside Village. You can see the site is located just on the east side of North Rutherford Boulevard, just to the southeast of the MTSU campus. Zoom in a little closer and you can actually see the site itself. As Matthew talked about, there is a retail center across the street and a gas station across the street as well on the other side of North Rutherford Boulevard. And Yearwood Avenue is the yellow line that runs along our eastern boundary of the property on that side, where the residential units are on the other side of that, and then on to the south and north as well on that side. As Matthew talked about, we do have dual zoning on this property at this point in time, so we're looking at trying to combine that down to make the PCD on that side. So we're taking the residential both in the city and county and pulling that into our planned commercial development. In regards to the land use on that side, this property is currently set up as public and institutional. We think that was just mainly based on the fact of its proximity to the MTSU campus. Properties across the street, which are retail and are in nature, are the same as what we're proposing tonight. We're actually included in that public institutional use, so we feel it's pretty much a comparable use. We see this opportunity for this development to be an enhancement or a piece that can help out with campus in regards to providing services for students and teachers and faculty and staff in their daily needs in regards to the services that we would potentially have for our clients inside the building itself. I'll give you a little background on a couple of the homes. This is one of the homes on the property itself, just a little character of the area. And this is across the street looking back across North Rutherford, and the site itself, is wooded along the roadway there. And then this is Yearwood Avenue, as we talked about. There was a petition that we did make to the County Road Board in regards to making our back connection out of the property onto this roadway, which was denied. And this just gives you a little character of what that roadway looks like today, and one of the reasons why the County Road County Road Board did not want us to attach to this time. And some of the homes that are along Yearwood. It's a picture of North Rutherford Boulevard looking south. North Rutherford Boulevard, looking to the north is, like we said, this is a 4-lane divided median roadway, very major arterial on this side of town. And this is a picture of the Shell station and a portion of the retail center across the street. Look at the plan itself. We're looking at proposing a 1-story single building that's about 11,100 square feet. This will be a multi-tenant type of retail strip center on that side. On the northern side of the building, we're providing a drive-through access on that side. So we're looking at potentially, a restaurant or a dry cleaner or some kind of bank tenant type of opportunity on that northern side there. And the rest of the building would be, at lease in regards to other tenants on that side. Matthew did talk about in regards to our work with the Water and Sewer Department on that side. We were advised that this is a low sewer capacity area out here, so we were looking at low flow users to be our tenants in this space on that side. So we definitely will be working with the Water and Sewer Department in regards to if a tenant does come forward, to make certain that use is appropriate in regards to our sewer flow from the property out on that side. So you can see on the back side, we got our 10 queuing spaces on the back side for our potential drive-through on that side. We do have one access point out to North Rutherford. As Matthew talked about there in that southeastern corner, you can see we have that stub going back out towards Yearwood, which is there for if in the future at some point in time, the county and or city, whoever is the ownership of Yearwood, if that connection could be made and or requested to be made, that stub will be there to allow for that to happen in the future. We do have a loading zone. If you can see on the lower right-hand, the lower portion of the site itself, we were asked to incorporate a loading zone so that any of these types of tenants that would be getting some deliveries and such for their businesses or restaurants on that side have a dedicated loading zone for those trucks to unload and deliver their goods to those buildings on that side. We do have on this property, we have 3 sides more or less encompassed by some form of required buffer in regards to zoning on that side. On the north side and then on the south side, this is reaching from the front of the building back towards Yearwood. We've incorporated a type D, which is the second greatest buffer we have in the city on that side, which is a double staggered row of evergreen trees on those 2 sides there. And then during planning commission, we kind of went back and went through it and kind of deemed that it was better to have a fence along Yearwood. So that portion you see all the way from the north to south portion of our site along Yearwood, that incorporates a 6-foot tall PVC fence. And on the outside or the residential side of that fence, we're incorporating the rest of the buffer that we're really, this is more or less a type 2 or an option 2 buffer in regards to a type D that allows for a fence, and then landscape plantings on the exterior portion of that on that side. So we have more or less, we've added some extra layer of encapsulation, and also in regards to vehicles coming around that building, going in that drive-through or just driving around the building itself, we'll add that extra protection in regards to headlights not going across Yearwood and into the homes across the street. So that fence kind of serves a dual purpose, one from a security standpoint, but also one from the standpoint of providing a shield from lighting for headlights and stuff coming through that parking lot going around the building on that side.
Hey, Rob.
Yes, sir.
What kind of height and what kind of bushes are those in a type
Those are evergreen trees, so those aren't really bushes, these are trees. They'll be planted 6 foot to start on that side, and those will be going up to 20, 30, 40, 50 feet, depending on the species that we plant on that side. So that will fill that space out over time, so you'll have the fence, then you'll have the trees. They'll start off at 6 foot by 4 or 5 foot wide, and they'll be planted every 10 foot on center. So in the next 5 to 10 years, those will fill out and grow up to provide an extra layer of protection or division between the actual development and the Yearwood Avenue residents on that side there.
Okay.
Kind of give a little perspective in regards, you can see that fence and these cross sections that we provided this time is more or less show you the building itself is on the left-hand side with the, coming this in the lower right corner of the building itself. Kind of gives you a perspective about how this separation is between the building and the uses, but also shows where we're proposing that 6 foot tall fence and those evergreen trees on the outside along the Yearwood Avenue side. Kind of gives you a little perspective. And just a couple different views of, this is another view along Yearwood there showing the greater separation because this building and this property does tilt further away from Yearwood based on the aligning this building with North Rutherford. So this gets a little greater separation as you get more towards the north end of that side. So it gives you a little better feeling, but again, shows you that 6 foot tall fence and buffer there along Yearwood. And then this is giving you a little perspective in regards to when we're looking off at the southern end of the property in regards to the separation. This is where you see the double row of evergreen trees, which is then in the beginning process of this, you also have a 4 foot tall evergreen shrub laced in between that gap between the staggering on that side to fill in the gap in the short term as those trees mature out on that side. So that's the view on the south side. This will be showing you what that view looks like on the north side. The Yearwood Avenue property to the north, there is not a structure on that property at this time. It's a vacant property, so there is no structure shown on this diagram, but that shows you that we are providing that type D double staggered row of trees on that side as well. Architecturally, we'll be looking at a couple different brick components. This will be an all masonry structure with a darker type of brick on the lower portion with a lighter tan brick on the top. We're looking at doing some accent ephes along the cornice side of things on that side, so really playing into some good architectural character of the building on that side. And then keeping along with that darker kind of tint, we'll be doing some darker bronze metallic pieces along the windows, some smoked glass, and then also incorporating some shepherd hook or lighting fixtures along the actual building to add a little extra lighting, but also add some more architectural character to the building itself. This is just all 4 elevations. The north side, the north elevation on the top of this drawing is the one that actually faces Rutherford Boulevard, so this is what they will see from Rutherford. The middle drawing there is the back of this. This is what's be facing Yearwood Avenue. So aside from the fact that we'll have a fence and the evergreen trees growing up over time, this is what you would see if you were looking at the back of the building on that side. HVAC units and such will be on the roof, and then it'll be hidden behind the parapet wall that you see there in regards to the cornice elements on the back side of the building as well, not just on the front. We'll be putting these on the back. And then the side angles on those. Access, like I talked about, we do have one main access point. We're proposing an access point at the already existing 3-way intersection that's going on in North Rutherford. Right now, it is a 3-way. We're proposing to make this the 4th leg. We'll have a dedicated lane in. We'll have a dedicated lane, 2 dedicated lanes out, one to turn right on the Rutherford to head north, and one dedicated lane to turn left. So it'll be a 3-lane access point at this point in time. We'll also be including in the median itself, we'll be cutting the median to install a dedicated left-hand turn lane, so that as you're coming south on North Rutherford, a dedicated left-hand turn lane to cross the traffic that's heading north to get into the site on that side. So we're pretty much providing a very well 4-way intersection. And again, as I talked about earlier, there is that opportunity if in the future that there's an opportunity that there could be a connection based on whatever jurisdiction that we have stubbed that out for that opportunity there. A couple of the pieces, parts, we are looking at providing a couple little amenity areas. We're looking out in front of the drive-through portion of that with the potential for an outdoor dining area. Say if that was a restaurant that's on that north side, being a dining area. If not, that would be just more or less a space for outdoor gathering space on that side. And looking at, again, a couple other places with some, outdoor seating areas and such out along the building itself with a decorative type of pavement along the front of the building on that side, whether that be brick or stamped concrete or some type of material along the front side to add a little extra character to the building on that side. So, on the back side, we'll of course have a wonderful mail kiosk back there as well. I appreciate your time and consideration of this project, and I'm here for any questions now or at the public hearing.
Mr. Malshon, Mr. Graham had a question. So the fence, There is a fence placed, I guess it'd be on, is it the northern, or excuse me, the
East side,
The eastern side.
east side, yes.
North.
the east side along.
He was speaking, yeah, we provided a fence along the east side. Yearwood is the eastern property line, and he was asking about a fence in the northern where we're providing the full type D landscape buffer along the north side. He was asking about a fence on that side.
That's where you're doing the double,
Double staggered row with the evergreen shrubs as well.
And Rob, I brought this up during the planning commission meeting, but I know the planning commission doesn't love black chain link fence, but I talked to you guys after the meeting, and y'all kind of agreed that it would be okay to put that fence between this row of trees, which would not be visible, but it would give the security that the neighborhood was asking for,
And that's
both on the
definitely,
north side and the south side. If they were just, it's a double row of trees, and if they go with that black chain link fence between that row of trees, you don't see it, but it gives security from two directions. If you've got the drive-through across the back of the building there, so it keeps people from coming to Yearwood that might want to take advantage of somebody who's parked on the back side of the building. So it kind of secures the lot. From the other perspective, if something were to happen on this property, the getaway route might be to run back into the neighborhood, into the darkness, because once you go across Yearwood, there's no street lights, it's dark. So from a security standpoint, I think it's better that all the traffic that's on this property be directed back out to Rutherford Boulevard. And so that was the reason I suggested it. I know it failed miserably at the Planning Commission, but I still believe that it would be prudent to go ahead and put a chain link fence between the row of trees on the north and a chain link fence between the trees on the south end. The south end is going to develop again as commercial property probably in the near future. And if that were to take place, then the southern end fence and tree row will probably go away completely. But it just seems to be less expense and less burden on the developer, but it gives you the same amount of security as it would be if you wrapped it all the way around with the PVC fence.
Mr. Mulcher, is that something that your client would be willing to do as far as
yes.
so that would take care of the concern on the north end there, that kind of force people to stay from being able to cut right through?
Yeah, as we talked
think
with
I would-
Councilman Spelman afterwards, is that the idea of doing this was we would actually put the fence between the two rows of trees, so you wouldn't technically see it on that side of things. Now, a little caveat to the south side of this is my client does own or has under contract all 4 pieces of property to the south of this. So he's looking to expand upon this program with another development in the future. One, from the standpoint of, if we do put something there, that it makes sense in the future that he could take it down in regards to, whether these projects are related or not, but just in regards to the standpoint of being able to remove that in regards to having that accessibility between the 2 lots in the future that happen on that side. Plus, again, ownership of these 4 lots on the south side kind of also gives us, I didn't talk about it during my presentation, but it does give us the opportunity that when he does develop these properties to the south, it gives us another vehicular access means back to Louise Street, which is the next street down from this, that gets access back to North Rutherford, but also gets us access back to Yearwood to go down to Main Street on that side of that would be a chosen path for somebody leaving this development or the potential future development on those 4 parcels to the south, so.
And that would kind of be my suggestion would be is if we build a fence on the south side, that it be put in a situation with the understanding that should the property to the south develop and that it not be appropriate with that development, that it could be removed. But we're trying to plan it today under the current conditions as they exist today. And so I think the best route to go at this point would be to secure the property so that everything comes in and out off of Rutherford Boulevard and protect that neighborhood behind it as best we can. I do think that at some point in the future, and I don't know how far out into the future, that Yearwood may be annexed into the city if the people that own that property desire that. They won't be forced, but if they desire it and it develops that way, then with the upgrade of Yearwood, then leaving that stub street there as a access to Yearwood might be a good thing because it would give them another option in and out of the property. But until that improvement is made to that roadway does not need to carry the additional traffic that would be created by this project. So
And that's what we did with this in regards to the, the inclusion of the fence at Planning Commission along that property line. That fence blocks that stub off, so there's no chance for a vehicle to move unless they really chose that they wanted to ruin their vehicle to drive through the fence and the tree behind it. But that fence more or less precludes any opportunity for the vehicle to get out to Yearwood from this development.
right, and just for clarification's sake, the reason that we felt the PVC fence would be more applicable on the back of the property was because the cars going around the building, their lights would be shining into the residential area with that fence there, plus the buffer there. It will eliminate any possibility of those lights going across the street. And, you know, distance is the best buffer you can have, but this fence and that tree row will, and especially after it matures, will be a very good buffer for the neighborhood to protect their peace and quiet, as well as trying to accommodate the growth that will continue to happen along Rutherford Boulevard.
All right, we need to hold a public hearing. Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Anyone wishing to speak for or against this zoning request, please come to the podium. All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and we'll consider on first reading ordinance 19 OZ 51.
Let me ask one more question about lighting on in the parking lot. Could you speak a little bit to the requirements and the limitations to the parking lot lighting?
Sure. Mr. Shacklet, we have a section in our zoning ordinance that deals with lighting, and all new commercial developments must comply with our minimum lighting standards. And in some instances, they're maximum lighting standards. Like, we don't allow any more than half a foot candle to bleed over beyond the property line, and that's really a negligible amount of light spillover. So we have maximum heights for the lighting fixtures. We have we have limits on how those lighting fixtures can be directed. They have a little bit of an angle out, but primarily they're focused down. And if there are wall pack lighting fixtures on the buildings, they have to be shielded to prevent glare on the adjacent neighbors. So when the applicant submits a site plan for Planning Commission review, one of the components of that review will be of a photometric lighting plan and of the details and the cut sheets for the lighting fixtures to demonstrate that they comply with our minimum requirements.
Matthew, why excuse me, I'm 16 again. The question I've got is, why was the county able to deny, and I don't want us to have access to Yearwood now, but why was the county able to deny us access to Yearwood when the only access on these properties that existed came from Yearwood? The access was already there. How were they able to deny us access to Yearwood when the only access to this property came from Yearwood?
That's a good question. I don't know that I have the answer.
Good answer. Thank you. So I'll take that as a very honest answer.
I will offer just an additional comment. To be consistent, Mr. Smotherman and I had a disagreement on this in the Planning Commission, so I'll balance this discussion out with that just to make it fair. You know, when we originally talked about this, we talked about the buffer being adequate on all sides to do that, and I think we compromised by putting the solid fence on Yearwood to serve as that shield with the light infiltration into the area. The Planning Commission obviously felt strongly not to have a fenced area to block off that northern and southern entrance. I still think that's probably better, although the council will vote tonight, and whatever the council decides is what we will do. But I'm not sure I understood the need to block off that property from a circulation standpoint and the precedent that it sets to block off every property with itself as we move forward to have these self-contained properties. I mean, I probably would have, I know the folks in the audience don't want this, but I would have rather had the connectivity to Yearwood, because I think staff would have liked to have had that for lots of reasons as well, but obviously that's not an option. And I think the residents will be happy that's not an option. And I felt like that the solid panel fence was a good compromise to protect that light infiltration. But My preference would be not to have the chain link fence, specifically because I think the buffer, especially the double buffer, accomplishes what we would like to accomplish long-term without separating every parcel we have from one another. But just fair comment for the group.
I'll make a quick comment and then probably a motion, but I just think maybe the difference here is that we are surrounding commercial with residential. I think that makes the difference for me, is that certainly if this, if it was a commercial property right next to it, that we wouldn't want to carve out every single one and have every one of them fenced in, but it would basically, it'll take a fence on the north side for me to support it, and just because I think it's the right thing to do in this particular case, and to put as much boundary as we can around there. So with that, I'll make a motion, we approve it with the additions of the fence on the north and south side in between the shrubs as described by Mr. Smotherman.
May I get some clarification on that, Mr. LaLance?
Sure.
One thing that I'm concerned about on the south side, since Mr. Hazlett has development intentions on the south side, is if we put that fence in between the trees, that if that fence is removed to allow it to be to allow the development to have more continuity, that the removal of the fence, if it's in between the trees, may disturb those plantings. So perhaps if on the south side, if you're willing to give us the leeway to allow it to be on one or the other side of the plantings so as not to disturb those plantings.
And I don't mean to be flippant about this, but for someone that's trying to get in or get out, is a 6-foot chain link fence really going to make that much of a difference for somebody who's, they're just going to jump over it. I understand it's a barrier, but.
Depends on how old they are, I guess.
And is 6 foot the height that is?
6 foot, okay. All right, never mind.
Is the height 6 foot or?
6 foot is what we're.
6 foot chain link
Okay,
fence.
never
It would
mind.
match the PVC, the back fence, you're saying the same height as the back.
And you're right, some people will jump over
Yeah.
a 6-foot fence even, but
Yeah.
I won't.
Not me, no. I do understand what you're saying. The only thing I would hate, the north side I completely get, but if we know that the developer's already got the south side to try to have some continuity, I'm not sure it makes sense to have someone pay to put a fence up and then either have them to tear it down, but.
I agree 100% if I knew that property was going to develop in the next 5 years, but there's no guarantee that it will. And that's kind of the reason I feel like, and I would, not to amend your motion, but on the south side, I would suggest when the property becomes commercial on the south side, that the restriction be removed on the fence and the buffer, because they may want to remove both of them depending on the continuity of how they're developing further south. But
That's fine.
Would the same thing be potentially possible for the northern piece, or are we saying no, it would only be residential? Because there's obviously a cutout in this access to that northern parcel.
if the northern parcel was developed, I would say we probably need to implement the same restrictions as far as the north side and the back side. I keep referring to the back side, the east side would carry on the same.
The fence on the east would need to keep going.
It would be continuous so that you would expand this area that you've got inside you, I guess.
Mr. Moulton, before you get up there, Matthew, would you answer a question for just technical purposes? So because this is a planned development, can we, when we do something like this where we're talking about the potential of maybe being able to remove it or whatever, that all goes in the record or in the book, the planning book or something? Or do they have to amend it later? What?
Mr. LaLance, you read my mind. But as I'm listening to your motion, I'm thinking about how it's going to be worded in the planning or in the pattern book, and how we're going to administer it, and how it's going to be best worded so that people 10 years from now will be able to know exactly what.
Yeah, I see that. So, I think. Yeah, so if we, I have to think about how the wording would be obviously imperative, to get right.
And we can, depending on, we can do our best in between now and second reading to work with Mr. Mulchan on crafting language that would be consistent with your motion.
I think the reality is, if I
suspect, just listening to everybody, is that what we're trying to achieve here is that while this thing looks like it looks, that there's going to be, a good boundary around it, both fence and buffer, landscape type stuff. When there is some expansion to the north and to the south, we can't necessarily control what's in those parcels, but we might be able to allow some leniency on the northern and southern boundaries as far as what's in there as to how it then flows into the north and to the south if something happens at that point. Does that sound right? I mean, they could pull the fence out or the bushes or whatever to the south, certainly if it's gonna, to me, I think it's important, and if this is the same owner, now it depends on how long it takes for them to do this, but, if you're going to the south, I think it's maybe the most important thing here is actually the eastern boundary, just because it sort of sets the precedent for anything else that comes alongside, right? That they would continue something like that on down through there. But for now,
So what do you say?
can you work on that and however that was said, however I said that, put that in the motion?
We will wordsmith that between now and
Okay.
second reading if it's the desire of the council.
Is the northern property privately owned, or is that owned by MTSU? 'Cause
I want to say that the property along Yearwood, I think there are separate parcels. The property along Yearwood is private, and then the property along Rutherford, is that part of MTSU's? Private.
Is it?
Okay.
Okay,
It's
so
all,
it's
it's all
private.
private property,
Okay.
according to Mr. Hazlett.
I was gonna say, if it was MTSU, you might always want to have that buffer there, but if it's privately developed, then I think there's always room for adjustment on both the north and south fence. But I think as long as this project is, we're dealing with the conditions as they're presented today, and I think that's the why I would support what Rick's saying, and I think Rick is supporting what I'm saying, is under the current conditions, would be the best layout. With time, as the property develops, then it should be evaluated as to whether or not it should be removed. But I don't want it to be a permanent fence. If it's, we don't want to create boxes going down the street with each development. But at the same time, that's not what we have right now. We have residential property on both sides of it. RS-15 to the north. The property to the south is still residential property that we think is going to develop hopefully soon. And so I'm concerned about the south when putting it there, because I don't think it's going to be there that long, but there's no guarantees what happens with the economy or whether or not the person who currently owns the property may decide to sell it and have somebody else develop it, and they may sit on it for 15 years. So just understanding that we're dealing with the current conditions as the property sits today, I think the best plan is to have chain link fence between the north and south boundaries and the solid fence across the back in order to block lights from penetrating the vegetation to the neighborhood.
And just for clarification, if you look at the concept plan, they have the buffer stopping here and here, right before you get to the stubs to the north and south property line. Is that the limits of where you would like the fence to go?
That's where the fence stops as well.
Okay, thank you.
So we have a motion on the floor to continue with the fence that would be on the east side. We would have a chain link fence, black, that would be hidden in between the two buffers on the north and south side, but that would be subject to removal if additional property comes in to the planned development in the future.
And the fence would be 6 feet in height, and the buffer plantings would be subject to removal as well. On development.
So,
I'll second what Rick's motion was and what Shane just translated.
so have a motion and a second.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
No.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Folks, I hate to do this, but I have my kid's last basketball game of the year, so I'm going to sneak out and try not to get a speeding ticket for a game that started at 7:30.
Good luck.
So, Vice Mayor Skels Harris is going to take over.
Mr. Brumley?
Thank you, Vice Mayor Scales Harris. Our next public hearing is a rezoning request along Franklin Road. It is in the Tograi subdivision, which is a commercial subdivision located at the southwest corner of Franklin Road and Rucker Lane. This is for the westernmost lot of the Tograi subdivision. It's currently zoned CF, commercial fringe. Commercial fringe permits a variety of commercial uses. However, it does not permit motor vehicle service. The applicants are proposing a motor vehicle service use. It's actually a new Tire World location. You should all be familiar with Tire World. They have a number of locations here in Murfreesboro. They're looking to build a new tire service center there, as well as a small corporate office building for their corporate offices. The applicants approached us about zoning for the property, and with the use not being permitted in the CF zone, they first inquired about commercial highway. We really didn't want to open the door for everything that commercial highway would allow when none of the adjacent parcels have any of the rights of commercial highway, since they're all zoned commercial fringe. And so we discussed a planned development as an alternative approach. The applicants moved forward with the planned development, and they're here before you tonight. They went before the Planning Commission in December, and the Planning Commission recommended approval of the request. Mr. Matt Taylor will go over the request in more detail in a moment. Some of the surrounding land uses, as I mentioned, the Tograi subdivision is at this corner, and the only developed lot of the Tograi subdivision right now is the Toots West, located right on the corner. Directly across the street, across Franklin Road, is undeveloped RS-15 property, and to the south and to the west of the subject property is owned by River Oaks Community Church. River Oaks Community Church, the church building is in existence there off of Rucker Lane, but they own all the way curving around this property going back up to Rucker Lane. And there will be at some point when they expand, there will be an access drive that will loop around this property and give them access to Franklin Road. There is cross-access between the Tograi subdivision, including the Tire World, and the future drive for River Oaks Community Church. So there'll be good connectivity among the adjoining properties. Further to the west is a single-family residential subdivision located in the unincorporated county. The comprehensive plan calls for general commercial land use character for this property. And this particular use is consistent with the general commercial land use character. So this is consistent with the comprehensive plan. As I mentioned, the Planning Commission recommended approval of this request after holding a public hearing on December 4th. And unless you have any questions for me, I'll yield the floor to Mr. Taylor to make a brief presentation.
Hey, I just want to make a couple comments real quick. You come on up, but Matthew, I just tell you thank you for all the work you're putting in, man. This stuff is all hard these days, but I was gonna say this. I appreciate all the work you and your department is doing right now, but the best way that I know I can explain that to you is that I'm going to abstain from the discussion from this, which will probably make your night. But I do need to abstain from this discussion, okay, guys? So just I want to get that out there. But Matthew, thanks so much, man.
Thank you for your kind words.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Harris and members of the council. I'm Matt Taylor of SEC here in town. I am accompanied by Mr. Randy Lopez, who represents Tire World, the applicant on the project. And we do have a brief presentation over our proposed location of a new Tire World. As Mr. Blomley said, it's about 2.4 acres on the south side of Highway 96, just to the west of Rucker Lane. Some of the more recent development in the area was the Toots West, as well as River Oaks Community Church, both of which are of the same parent tract that this is located on. The current property is mostly cropland and pasture land. There's no active livestock on the site. As Mr. Blomley said, the site is zoned commercial fringe. This particular use is not allowed in that zoning district, but we feel like it is a very complementary use to not only the residents in the surrounding area, but to the businesses and their patrons that are close by as well. And then, as Mr. Blomley said, it is compliant with the 2035 land use plan. The campus itself, layout, we've broke the buildings apart to create a more campus atmosphere as well as separate the uses. The northerly or the larger building to the top of the page is more retail oriented. That's where our customers will come in, get their tires serviced, new tires. And the southern building will be more back of house corporate headquarters. Tire World has several locations spread around Middle Tennessee, not only just in Murfreesboro, and so we're going to consolidate that back of house use in this one location. Those buildings total about 14,000 square feet in size. They're both 1 stories. We've got over a third of the site that's dedicated to open space. It'll still be a very green space even after it's developed. We've tried to provide good pedestrian linkage back out to Highway 96, screening the parking at the same time, and then we've provided for ample landscaping around the site. We do have one driveway connection. We'll be connecting into an existing driveway onto Highway 96. That driveway was constructed with the Toots project. And then we've also planned for 2 other future connection points to commercial sites to the east and west of us. So whenever those develop, we'll be able to tie directly into those instead of having to get out on Highway 96 itself. Architecture, we very careful about maintaining a campus atmosphere while complying with the design guidelines. And so we've got defined entryways, multiple building planes, and then we shorten the maximum building height down to 30 feet. I think CF allows up to 45. So we've been very much more restrictive with this project than the CF district allows. The top picture here is what will face Highway 96. And it's a very attractive front of the building. Those doors will be frosted glass on each side of the main entrance there, so you can't see into those entryways. You'll notice a lot of intricacies on the brickwork, canopies, and the side, we carry that brickwork and that nice glass around. The rear building, the office building, it will contain the same architecture, brick detailing, so it creates that, reinforces that campus atmosphere for us. This just outlays all the materials. They're all good quality materials that we proposed on the building. And then we do have planned 2 formal open spaces. The one on the northern side would be geared more toward customers, while the southern side would be for our employees. Some of those, we'd have some enhanced paved areas through pavers and colored concrete, and of course introducing seating and shade structures. And then landscaping, we'll have a type D buffer along the west and south where we abut the church's property, and then the rest of the property will be the normal perimeter landscaping, and of course base of building landscaping except where those garage doors are to get into the building. So some of the screening efforts. And then the uses, we really narrowed these down so they're very low impact and complementary to the area. We know exactly what we want to do, so these uses that we've outlined as allowed all go back to what the use of the building itself is. So there's no speculative use associated with this list. This is much more restrictive than the more comprehensive CF uses. So I'll be happy to answer any questions now or after the hearing that you might have.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Okay, we will now open the public hearing to rezone approximately 2.41 acres. Anyone here, we're going to have the same rules, individuals, 3 minutes, speaking on behalf of a group, 5 minutes. We'll open the public hearing at this time. Anyone wishing to speak? If not, we'll close the public hearing. And can we get a motion and a second on ordinance 19-OZ-49?
I know Tire World is one of the really nice businesses that we have in Murfreesboro here with multiple locations, and I think it'll be great that we've got their headquarters going onto this property as well, and that they'll be calling Murfreesboro their corporate home. So with having said that, I think it follows the character of Franklin Road and is appropriate in that area. So you want to make a motion? You want me to?
It sounded like you just
That
made.
that was just promo.
Can I second it, since I don't ever get to
I'll make the
agree with
motion.
Eddie? Can I second his motion?
Yeah.
That's awesome. And across the table.
I'm just glad that Ronnie and I are agreeing on something and getting along.
That's why we have you all separated.
I know it. I made the motion and Ronnie seconded.
Yes, ma'am.
Mrs. Wright, will you call the roll for these children, please?
Mr. LaLance, Mr. Martin,
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman,
Aye.
Mr. Wade,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris.
Aye. Okay, next item, we're going to talk about rezoning approximately 0.3 acres along East Vine Street and Kerr Avenue.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Scales Harris. Page down a few pages. Next property that we're going to consider is property located on the southwest corner of East Vine Street and Kerr Avenue. It consists of about 0.3 acres. It's currently zoned RS8. I believe there's either a duplex or a triplex on the property right now, a non-conforming duplex or triplex. The applicant wishes to rezone that property to RS4 to redevelop that acreage for 3 single-family lots. The difference between the two is that RS8 is single-family with a minimum lot size of 8,000 square feet, and RS4 is single-family with a minimum lot size of 4,000 square feet. So under the existing RS8 zone, the property is about 13,000 square feet. 1 lot is the maximum number of lots that could be created on this property. Once you rezone that down to RS4, it could create a maximum of 3 single-family residential lots. So the applicant does wish to demolish the existing duplex or triplex and redevelop it with 3 single-family lots. And he has submitted just a conceptual plat. No plat has been submitted, of course, until the rezoning is final, but you can see how he proposes to subdivide the property. 3 lots, a little over 4,000 square feet each. And in the downtown, the RS4 zone is fairly prevalent. It's really the most appropriate place for the RS4 zone, and it's what downtown is where the RS4 zone was made for. It's really the only place that we see it. And there is existing RS4 zoning in the area. As you can tell, the majority of the block bounded by Vine, Hancock, and Kerr, with the exception of this parcel and the parcel to the south, is already zoned RS4, as is the block to the west bounded by Hancock, Vine, and Sevier. So it's consistent with the zoning in the area, and it will allow for some redevelopment on this property as well. The comprehensive plan recommends suburban residential for the property. Suburban residential is more for the periphery of the city, and staff feels that auto-urban residential is more, which is more consistent with RS4, is probably more consistent for this area as opposed to suburban residential, which is more in line with what's around the periphery of the city. So City Council will need to determine whether or not this is an appropriate instance to deviate from the comprehensive plan. And while I'm here, I'll just give you an update. Staff has been vigorously meeting with Reagan Smith over the last several weeks. We had our kickoff meeting with Reagan Smith on January the 9th for our comprehensive plan future land use map update. And we have had probably 5 or 6 meetings since then with them, and also internally with staff in preparation for that, analyzing all of the various things that we want them to look at. And so that's moving full speed ahead, and we hope to have that completed product to you later on this year. And of course, we'll continue to keep you posted on that. With that being said, the Planning Commission did conduct a public hearing on this matter on December 4th and recommended approval of the rezoning request. Mr. Will Crunk is here, the applicant, if you have any questions for him. And I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing.
Any questions? At this time, we're going to open the public hearing to rezone approximately 0.3 acres along Kerr Avenue and Vine Street. The same rules apply: individual 3 minutes, group 5. Anyone wishing to speak for or against? If not, we'll close the public hearing. And now we're going to consider ordinance rezoning approximately 0.3 acres along Vine Street and Kerr Avenue.
Move for approval.
Second.
Mrs. Wright, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Martin?
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Wade?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris?
Aye. If there is no further business, we stand adjourned.